The boots were gone. Adelaide Boone stood in the doorway of her father's ranch house, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, and stared at the empty patch of floor where her boots were supposed to be. The worn leather pair she placed there every single night before she climbed the stairs to bed. Every single night for 3 years, ever since her father, Raymond Boone, had first asked her to leave them by the door. It was his way of telling her she was welcome in his home, that she did not need to sneak out before dawn the way she used to, the way she had when she was 17 and terrified, and running from a life she had not chosen. But they were gone now. And the man standing in the middle of the parlor, his hat in his hands, his jaw set like carved limestone, was not her father. He was Harvey Atkins, and the expression on his face told her everything she dreaded to know. "Where is he?" Adelaide asked, and her voice came out far steadier than she felt. The morning light was the pale gold of early October, slanting through the dust-hazed windows of the Boone Ranch house outside of Laramie, Wyoming territory, in the year 1882. She could hear the cattle lowing somewhere distant, and the wind pushed hard against the clapboard walls, and she could not breathe. Harvey did not answer right away. He turned his hat slowly in his hands, those big, calloused hands that she had noticed the very first time she ever saw him, 3 months ago at the Laramie General Store. He had been buying feed and she had been buying flour, and he had held the door for her without a word, and she had thought nothing of it then. She thought everything of it now. "Miss Boone," Harvey said, and his voice was low and careful, the way a man speaks when he is carrying something heavy and does not want to drop it. "There are some things I need to tell you. I want you to know that I am telling you the truth, all of it, even the parts that are going to hurt." Adelaide stepped fully into the parlor and let the door swing shut behind her, the empty space where her boots should have been burned at the edge of her vision like a brand. "He is gone, is he not?" she said. It was not a question. Harvey Atkins looked at her, and something in his dark eyes broke open the way ice breaks on a river in spring. "Yes," he said. "Your father passed in the night. I am sorry." The world did not tilt the way people always said it did. It simply went very, very still. Raymond Boone had been the one constant of Adelaide's existence since she had come back to him at the age of 20, ashamed and road-weary and carrying nothing but a canvas bag and the boots on her feet. He had opened the door without a word of reproach, fed her, given her the room that had always been hers, and then said, before he went to bed that first night, "Leave your boots by the door before you sleep. So you know when you wake up and see them that you are exactly where you are supposed to be." She had done it every night since, even after the shame faded, even after Laramie began to feel like home again. And now the boots were gone and her father was gone with them, and a man she barely knew was standing in her parlor with grief and something else, something careful and watchful moving behind his eyes. She crossed to the nearest chair and sat down, not because she was graceful but because her legs informed her, plainly and without sentiment, that they were done holding her up. Harvey did not move. He just watched her, and the watching was not unkind. "How?" she managed. "His heart," Harvey said. Doc Hensley came before first light, said it was peaceful. He was in his bed. Adelaide pressed her hands flat against her knees. "How do you come to be the one standing in my house telling me this?" Harvey finally moved. He set his hat on the side table near the door, and he pulled one of the straight-back chairs from against the wall and set it across from her and sat down. He sat the way a man sits when he intends to stay, not perched on the edge but settled, solid, like he was planting himself in the earth. "Your father and I had an arrangement," he said. "I have been leasing the eastern pasture from him for the past year. My own land adjoins it on the south. He and I have been talking regularly, twice a week at minimum. He told me things about his health he apparently did not share with you." The words landed like stones in still water, each one sending ripples out that Adelaide could feel moving through her chest. "He knew," she said. "He knew his heart was giving out, yes. He had known for about 4 months. 4 months. Her father had sat across from her at the supper table for 4 months, had passed the biscuits and asked after her work at the dressmaker's and commented on the weather, and he had been carrying the knowledge of his own ending the entire time. The betrayal of it winded her. She could not be angry at a dead man, and yet the feeling was there, huge and formless and hot. "He told you instead of me," she said. Harvey did not flinch from that. "He told me because I could do something practical with the information, and because he had a request." Adelaide lifted her eyes to his. "What kind of request?" "He asked me to look after you. Not in any presumptuous way, he was clear about that. He said you were capable and fierce, and would likely throw a boot at my head if I suggested otherwise." A ghost of something that might have been a smile moved across Harvey's face and was gone. But he wanted someone close who knew the situation. Someone who could make sure you were not blindsided when the time came. "And yet here I am," Adelaide said, "very thoroughly blindsided." "Yes," Harvey said simply, "I am sorry. I should have found a way to tell you. I spent the last 4 months arguing with myself about it and finding reasons why it was not my place. That was cowardice on my part, and I am not proud of it." She studied him. Harvey Atkins was a man of perhaps 32 or 33, lean and broad-shouldered, with brown hair that the sun had pulled to the color of old copper at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been set with a plumb line. He was not a man who smiled easily, but he was not a man who looked away from hard things either. She had gathered that much in 3 months of occasional encounters in town. "What was the arrangement?" she asked. "About the land." "Your father leased me the eastern pasture. In his will, and I know this because he told me, and also because he insisted I be present when he had Morrison at the land office draw it up. He has left you the house and the home pasture. The eastern pasture he has left to me outright, provided I pay you a fair market price for it, which has been appraised and documented." Adelaide stared at him. "He sold my land without telling me." "He secured a fair price for your land so that you would have immediate funds and not be forced to make desperate decisions." Harvey leaned forward, his forearms on his knees, his voice very steady. "Adelaide, I want you to know that if you are unhappy with the arrangement, I will renegotiate. I will pay more. I will give the parcel back and find another solution. Your father's wishes do not bind you to anything you find unjust." The use of her given name startled her. She had not given him permission to use it, and yet it did not offend her, which startled her further. "You called me Adelaide," she said. He did not apologize. "Your father called you Adelaide," he said. "He spoke of you with considerable pride. I have been hearing your name for a year. Forgive me if I should have kept to formality." She shook her head slowly. "No, it is fine." She looked at the empty place by the door again. "Where are my boots?" Harvey looked at her steadily. "I moved them," he said. "I hope that was not wrong. I moved them because Doc Hensley and the men from town were coming in and out before you came downstairs, and I did not want them to be stepped on or moved carelessly. I set them in the kitchen by the back door." Adelaide stared at him. "I put them where I thought you could still find them," he said, "where they would still be yours." She did not say anything for a long moment. Something was happening in the center of her chest that she did not entirely understand, a kind of opening like a hand releasing a fist it had been holding for years. "Thank you," she said at last. Harvey Atkins nodded once. "Tell me what you need," he said, "and I will see to it." She almost laughed. It was such an unexpected thing to say. Not an offer of condolences, not a list of practical matters rattled off to give himself something to do. Just that simple, open question placed in her hands like a gift. "I need to see him," she said. "He is upstairs," Harvey said. "When you are ready." He stood with her. He did not reach for her, did not put a steadying hand anywhere, did not treat her like something breakable. He simply rose to his feet and moved to give her space to pass, and somehow that restraint meant more to her than any comfort might have. Adelaide went upstairs to say goodbye to her father, and Harvey Atkins sat back down in that straight-backed chair and waited. He waited for 2 hours. When she came back down, her eyes were red but her face was composed, and she had her boots on her feet. Raymond Boone was buried 3 days later in the Laramie cemetery. On a gray October afternoon, with the wind coming down hard off the Laramies and the cottonwoods shedding their leaves in great golden gusts. Half of Laramie turned out for it, which surprised Adelaide, though it probably should not have. Her father had been a quiet man of considerable decency, and people in small places tend to notice that. Harvey Atkins stood at the back of the gathering, separate, his hat held over his chest. He caught Adelaide's eye exactly once, across the crowd, and gave her the smallest nod, and she found herself grateful for it in a way she could not have explained. The weeks that followed were a study in the particular loneliness of grief. Adelaide had her work at the dressmaker's, which gave her hands something to do and her mind a narrow track to run on. She had the house, which she kept fastidiously because her father had kept it fastidiously, and it would have felt like a betrayal to let it go to disorder. She had the horse, a sturdy bay mare named Clover, who needed feeding and brushing and whom Adelaide talked to with increasing frankness as November came on, and the Wyoming sky turned the color of a bruise each evening. And she had Harvey Atkins, who appeared at her door every Tuesday and Friday with some practical reason for being there. The first Tuesday it was to discuss the formal transfer of the eastern pasture. He brought Morrison from the land office and all the paperwork in good order, and he paid her the appraised price on the spot, in bank-certified funds that she had not expected. The first Friday it was to repair the hinge on the barn door, which he had apparently noticed was failing and had told her father about, and since Raymond Boone was no longer in a position to fix it, Harvey seemed to feel the obligation had transferred to him. Adelaide watched him work from the barn door, the cold light pressing through the slats, and tried to decide what to make of him. "You do not have to do this," she told him on that first Friday, her arms crossed against the chill. Harvey tightened the hinge bolt and tested the swing of the door. "I know," he said. "My father asked you to look after me. That does not mean you are obligated to make yourself my general handyman." Harvey looked at her over his shoulder. "I am not doing it because your father asked," he said. "I am doing it because the hinge is broken and someone ought to fix it." She studied the back of his head. "Why did you tell my father about the hinge in the first place, if you were only leasing the eastern pasture?" He was quiet for a moment, turning the wrench in his hands. "Because I noticed it," he said finally, "and because noticing a thing and saying nothing seems dishonest to me." Adelaide thought about that for a long time after he left. The second Tuesday brought a hard early snowfall, and Harvey showed up with a cord of split wood stacked in his wagon that he transferred to the woodpile beside the house without being asked, and without making any particular announcement about it. "I did not order that wood," Adelaide said, standing in the doorway. "No," Harvey agreed, lifting another armload. "I am perfectly capable of ordering my own wood." "I know you are." "Then why?" "Because I split more than I needed this season and it would rot in my barn." He set the wood down and straightened and looked at her with those steady dark eyes. "You are doing me a favor taking it." She narrowed her eyes at him. He was either the most naturally generous man she had ever encountered, or he was very good at making generosity look like practicality so she would not feel beholden. She could not decide which. "Stay for supper," she said, before she had fully decided to say it. He blinked. It was the first time she had seen him look anything approaching surprised. "If you are sure," he said. "I said it, did I not?" He stayed. He ate the elk stew she had made with quiet appreciation, complimenting the seasoning with a specificity that told her he was actually tasting it rather than simply being polite. He helped her clear the table without being asked, which no man outside her father had ever done in her presence. And then he sat across from her at the table with a cup of coffee and they talked. Not about the land or the practical arrangements or Raymond Boone's wishes. They talked about other things. Adelaide learned that Harvey had come to Wyoming from Missouri in 1876, after his own father's farm had been lost to debt following the economic panic of 1873. He had worked cattle drives for 3 years before he had enough saved to buy his own land. He had no family to speak of, a younger brother in Kansas City who worked in a foundry with whom he exchanged letters twice a year. He had never been married. Why not? Adelaide asked, because she had decided that Harvey Atkins was a man who could handle a direct question, and she was right. He considered it seriously, rolling his coffee cup between his palms. "I have not met a woman who seemed to want the life I was building," he said. "The solitude of it, the work of it. Most of the women in this territory want to get somewhere, not stay in one place and make a go of it." "I stayed," Adelaide said without thinking. He looked at her across the table. "Yes," he said, "you did." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms when two people have said something slightly more significant than they intended, and are both deciding whether to acknowledge it or let it settle quietly into the ground like rain. Adelaide chose the rain. "Tell me about Missouri," she said, and he did. And the evening stretched out long and golden and warm despite the snow pressing against the windows. And when he finally stood to leave, it was past 9 o'clock and neither of them had noticed. He collected his coat and hat from the hook by the door, and Adelaide stood in the hallway, and there was a moment where neither of them moved. He was close enough that she could have touched his sleeve without fully extending her arm. "Same time Friday," he said. "Is there another hinge that needs fixing?" she asked. "There is probably a fence post or two." "All right then," she said. "Friday." He left, and Adelaide stood for a moment in the hallway, and then she went to the kitchen and retrieved her boots from beside the back door, where Harvey had placed them on the morning her father died, and she brought them back to the front door and set them down in their place. She stood looking at them for a long moment. The gesture had been her father's, but the feeling it gave her was unchanged. She was here. She was welcome. She was home. She went to bed with that certainty wrapped around her like a quilt. December arrived with its teeth already showing. The winters in Wyoming territory in 1882 were not theoretical hardships. They were the genuine article, with blizzards that could trap a person for days and cold that made every breath a small labor. Adelaide had grown up with this, and she was prepared for it, but the solitude of it without her father felt different, sharper. Harvey came on Tuesdays and Fridays without fail, through snow and wind, and the particular gray misery of December in the high plains. He repaired the fence posts he had mentioned. He helped her navigate the paperwork that came with the transfer of the land. He sat across from her at her kitchen table and drank her coffee, and talked with her about the cattle markets and the coming spring and the condition of the roads to town. And Adelaide found herself, with an increasing frequency that she was not sure how to manage, noticing things about him. The way his hands moved when he was explaining something he found interesting, a kind of careful precision. The crease that appeared beside his left eye when he was genuinely amused rather than merely politely so. The way he listened to her, which was different from the way most men listened to women in 1882, which was to say he actually listened, asked questions that indicated he had heard what she said, remembered things she had mentioned in previous conversations. He remembered, for instance, that she had mentioned in passing one Tuesday in late November that she had always wanted to read a particular book, Ben-Hur, by Lew Wallace, which had been published just a couple of years prior, and had been talked about considerably in town, but which she had not been able to find available to borrow. He showed up on a Friday in early December with a copy under his arm. He set it on her table without comment or ceremony, just placed it there while he was taking off his coat, and she stared at it and then stared at him. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "Cheyenne," he said. "I had business there last week." He had gone to Cheyenne and brought her back a book. She had not asked him. He had simply remembered and acted on it. "Harvey," she said, and her voice did something unexpected in the middle of his name. "This is." "It is only a book," he said, but he was looking at her with that careful steadiness, and she could see something behind it now that she had not been certain she was seeing before. Something that wanted very much to step forward but was holding itself in check, the way a man holds himself in check when he is not sure if the feeling is welcomed. Adelaide picked up the book and held it. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in a way that went considerably further than the book itself. "You are welcome," he said in the same expanded sense. They stood there for a moment in her kitchen, the cold pressing at the windows and the wood stove ticking warmly, and Adelaide understood with a clarity that surprised her that something fundamental had shifted. The shape of the space between them had changed. It was no longer merely comfortable. It was charged, electric in the quiet way of things that have not yet been named but are already inevitable. She made supper. They ate. They talked. He left at 9. She set her boots by the door and lay awake longer than usual and thought about his hands. It was on a Tuesday in early January that the dark past she had been carefully not discussing announced itself in the form of a man on a gray horse pulling up to her front gate. Adelaide saw him from the window before he dismounted, and the recognition hit her like a fist under the ribs. Thomas Greer. She had not seen Thomas Greer in 4 years, not since she had walked away from him in a town in Colorado and taken the first eastbound stage back toward Wyoming with shaking hands and $10 and the clothes on her back. Thomas Greer was the secret she had never told her father, not fully. Raymond Boone had known she came back damaged from 2 years of following a man who had turned out to be a very different man than he had appeared. He had not known the specifics. Adelaide had worked very hard to keep the specifics contained, the way you contain a fire by refusing it air. She considered not opening the door. She opened the door, because Adelaide Boone had inherited a great many things from Raymond Boone, and one of them was the conviction that things not faced directly only got larger. Thomas Greer was 38 years old, and handsome in the way of things that look fine from a distance. He had the kind of smile that had once seemed charming and now struck her as a trap with the mechanism poorly concealed. "Adelaide," he said, and the familiarity of her name in his mouth made her skin pull tight. "You are looking well." "Thomas," she said, "what are you doing in Laramie?" "I heard about your father," he said, with an expression of sympathy so well constructed she might have believed it once. "I wanted to pay my respects, and to see how you were getting on." She studied him over the threshold. She did not invite him in. "I am getting on fine," she said. "You did not need to make the trip." His eyes moved over her shoulder into the house. "Living alone, are you?" "That is not your concern," she said. His expression shifted, and beneath the constructed sympathy she could see the thing she had always known was there, a calculating attention, a man measuring distances and options. "You have land now," he said, "and some money, I would imagine." There it was. She had wondered how long it would take. "Whatever you are imagining, Thomas," she said calmly, "you can stop imagining it. We are done. We have been done for 4 years. Nothing about my father's death changes that, and neither does my being alone." "Adelaide," he stepped toward the door. "Do not." The word came out flat and cold and final. He stopped. She held her ground in the doorway, heart hammering, hand steady, because she had learned the hard way that Thomas Greer fed on any sign of retreat. "I am going to ask you to get back on your horse," she said, "and ride back to wherever you came from. If you come to this property again, I will report you to Sheriff Calloway. I have nothing further to say to you." For a long moment, Thomas Greer looked at her with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite anything she had a polite name for. And then something shifted in his face into a mask of easy, dangerous pleasantness. "As you say," he said, "for now." He went back to his horse and rode away down the road, and Adelaide closed the door and put her back against it and let her hands shake. She was still standing there 15 minutes later when she heard boots on the porch steps, and her whole body went rigid, and then a knock, and Harvey's voice saying, "Adelaide, I saw a rider leaving as I came up the road. Is everything all right?" She opened the door and he was there, his hat dusted with the fine dry snow that had been falling all morning, his face alert with a concern he was keeping carefully quiet. She made a decision. She was done with secrets, at least with Harvey Atkins. "Come in," she said. "There is something I should probably tell you," she told him. She told him all of it, which she had never told anyone, not fully. About meeting Thomas Greer in 1875 in Cheyenne when she was 19 and impetuous and hungry for a life that seemed larger than Laramie. About following him to Colorado. About the 2 years that followed, which had not been a romance so much as a slow education in what a man could do to a woman's sense of herself when he had enough time and enough skill with hidden motives. Nothing that left marks a doctor could catalog. Just the steady, grinding erosion of her certainty, her confidence, her sense of her own judgment. About walking away, finally, on a morning when she realized with crystalline clarity that if she stayed another season she would not recognize herself at all. About coming home to her father who had put her boots by the door. Harvey listened to all of it without interruption. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet and the snow was thickening outside the window. "He wants the land," Harvey said. "He wants whatever he can get," Adelaide said. "The land, the money from the sale of the eastern pasture, whatever he imagines I have. He always did want what other people had more than what he had himself." Harvey turned his coffee cup on the table with a slow, deliberate movement. "Is he the kind of man who accepts a no?" She met his eyes. "He has before," she said. "Eventually, but it usually requires more persuasion than I prefer." Harvey nodded. He was thinking something through, she could see it in the set of his jaw. "I want to propose something," he said, "and I want you to know that it is a proposal you are entirely free to refuse, and that refusing it will not change anything between us." "Go on," she said. "Thomas Greer does not know what the situation is here," Harvey said. "He does not know who I am or what I am to you. If he believed there was a man in your life, someone whose presence would complicate any plans he might have, he might decide the effort is not worth his while." Adelaide studied him. "You are suggesting you pretend to be, what? A husband, a beau." "I'm not suggesting pretending," Harvey said, and his voice went very careful and very still. "I am suggesting that I am whatever I actually am to you, and that perhaps Greer seeing me here on Tuesdays and Fridays would allow him to draw his own conclusions." The quiet in the kitchen was of a different quality now. "What are you actually to me?" Adelaide asked because she needed to hear him say it. Harvey met her eyes. "I am not sure," he said honestly. "I know what I would like to be, but I am not in the habit of declaring things before I know they are welcomed." Adelaide set her hands flat on the table. Her heart was doing something that was not entirely comfortable, a full, aching thing that was also undeniably wonderful. "Tell me anyway," she said, "what you would like to be." He looked at her for a long moment and then he said, quietly and precisely, "Something permanent." She held that word. Permanent. It had the weight of a real thing, not a dream. This was not Thomas Greer's dazzling promises of a larger life. This was a man who fixed broken hinges and brought wood without being asked and carried books from Cheyenne and listened when she talked, saying, without any performance at all, that he wanted to stay. "All right," she said. "All right, which part?" he asked, and there was something very nearly vulnerable in the question. "All of it," she said. "All right to Greer drawing his own conclusions, and all right to the other thing you said." Harvey Atkins looked at her across the kitchen table, and the thing that opened in his face was not dramatic. It was quiet and deep, like water finding its level, like something that had been holding its breath releasing it at last. "Then I would like to call on you properly," he said, "with your permission." "You have been calling on me twice a week for 3 months," Adelaide pointed out. "With purpose," he agreed, "but not with declaration. I want to be clear about my intentions so there is no confusion on your part or anyone else's." She found that she was smiling and that it felt entirely natural, which was itself remarkable. "Harvey," she said, "your intentions have been abundantly clear for at least 6 weeks. You are simply very careful about stating them aloud." Something shifted in his expression that was as close to delight as she suspected his face ever came. "Are they?" he said. "The book," she said. "From Cheyenne. I told you it was only a book. No book is only a book when a man goes to another city to find it for a woman he did not have to think about." He was quiet for a moment. "When did you know?" he asked. "The wood," she said. "You said I was doing you a favor taking it." He looked down at his coffee and then back up at her. "Was that too transparent?" "It was exactly the right amount of transparent," she said. That was the beginning of it, or rather the formal acknowledgement of a beginning that had already been underway for some time. Harvey called on Adelaide properly. which in the Laramie of 1882 meant that people in town saw them together, and Mrs. Hartwell, who ran the dressmakers where Adelaide worked, gave her a significant look over the cutting table, and old Patterson at the general store stopped calling Harvey, the Atkins fellow, and started calling him, your young man, which made Adelaide feel something warm and slightly embarrassing every time. Thomas Greer made one more appearance, a week after his first visit, this time catching Adelaide coming out of the general store on a Saturday morning with a basket of supplies. She had Clover tied at the post and was loading the saddlebags, and she turned around and he was there, the same gray horse, the same constructed smile. "Still getting on fine," he said. "Perfectly fine," Adelaide said, turning back to the saddlebags. "Adelaide," his voice dropped, went practiced gentle, the voice that had once worked on her. "I only want to talk. There is nothing to talk about. You have a good situation here," he said. "House, a bit of money, you should not be alone." "I am not alone," said a voice behind her. She turned. Harvey was there, having emerged from Patterson's with what appeared to be a length of rope and no particular hurry, and he was looking at Thomas Greer with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who has nothing to prove, and consequently does not need to prove it. Greer looked at Harvey. Harvey looked at Greer. It was not a confrontation in any theatrical sense. It was simply two men occupying the same space, and one of them making the nature of his occupation very clear. "This is Harvey Atkins," Adelaide said calmly. "He has land adjacent to mine." "Among other things," Harvey said pleasantly, and coiled the rope over his shoulder, and stepped close enough to Adelaide that the message was impossible to misread. Thomas Greer's constructed smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes calculated and found the calculation unfavorable. "Well," he said, "I can see you are well situated." He tipped his hat. "Adelaide," he looked at Harvey. "Atkins." He mounted his gray horse and rode back down the main street, and Adelaide watched until he turned the corner, and then she let out a breath she had been holding since she spotted him. "Thank you," she said. "I did not do anything," Harvey said. "You were here," she said. He looked at her. "I will always be here," he said simply. She picked up her basket and handed it to him to carry because her hands needed something to do, and he was there, and it seemed natural. And he took it without comment and walked with her to Clover and helped her finish loading the saddlebags. And she thought, quietly, and with a certainty she had not felt about anything in a very long time, that this was what it was supposed to feel like. Thomas Greer left Laramie within the week. She heard from Mrs. Hartwell, who heard everything, that he had come asking around about property and prospects, and had found neither to his satisfaction. Adelaide did not think he would come back. Men like Thomas Greer did not generally persist against real resistance. They preferred easier targets. She felt the last of the tension she had been carrying since his first appearance leave her in a long, quiet exhale. January gave way to February, which in Wyoming was not an improvement but was at least a familiar misery, and Adelaide and Harvey's Tuesday and Friday visits took on a different quality now that they had spoken plainly. There was an ease between them that had been building all along but could now be acknowledged openly, and acknowledging it made it expand. He brought her wildflowers, which was an ambition requiring considerable imagination in February in Wyoming, and she was charmed beyond all reason when he showed up one Friday with a small bunch of dried goldenrod he had preserved from the fall, tied with a piece of red ribbon. "Where did you find red ribbon?" she asked. "Patterson's," he said, with a dignity that dared her to find it funny. She found it completely wonderful and told him so, and she put the goldenrod in a glass on the kitchen windowsill where it stayed for weeks until it finally gave up entirely. She read him passages from Ben-Hur on Friday evenings, which had become the thing they did, and he listened with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, and commented occasionally on the Christological themes or the Roman history with a quiet intelligence that reminded her that Harvey Atkins had not had much formal schooling, but had read more widely than anyone she had encountered and thought about what he read. "Where did you learn about Roman history?" she asked one evening. Same place I learned everything, he said. Books I could borrow and fires to read by. She looked at him over the top of Ben-Hur, this man who had built everything he had from very nearly nothing, who fixed broken hinges and brought wood without being asked and carried goldenrod tied with red ribbon across February, Wyoming, and the feeling in her chest was so complete and so certain that it alarmed her for a moment with its sheer size. "Harvey," she said. "Yes," he said, without looking up from the fire. "I believe I am in love with you." He went very still. She watched the side of his face. He turned to look at her. He looked at her the way he looked at a problem he was working out, careful and complete, except this time what she saw working through his expression was not calculation, but an emotion so enormous it seemed to cost him something to hold. "Adelaide," he said, and her name in his voice was entirely different from her name in Thomas Greer's voice, like the same word in two entirely different languages. "I have been in love with you since October." "October," she said. "That is before your father died." "Before your father died," he corrected gently. "Yes," she sat with that. "You did not say anything. You had just lost your father," he said. "And before that you were a woman I admired from a respectful distance. Declaring love to a grieving woman who has just lost her only family seemed poorly timed," she said. "Badly wrong," he said. "I wanted you to be steady before I put anything else in your hands." She set the book down on the table. "I am steady," she said. "I know," he said. "I can see that. So what do you intend to do about it?" He looked at her steadily. That deep, unperformative look that she had come to understand meant he was saying something he had thought about very carefully. "I intend," he said, "to ask if you will marry me. In the spring, if that suits you. If it does not suit you, in whatever season you prefer." She had not been expecting the directness of it, and she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from genuine surprise and genuine delight, and the sound of it in the winter kitchen was so alive and so warm that Harvey's face broke into something she had not quite seen from him before, a full, open, unguarded smile that transformed him entirely. "Yes," she said, "the spring suits me." He stood up and she stood up and they were very close, and he raised his hand and touched her face with the back of two fingers, the most careful and deliberate touch, and she leaned into it, and he said her name once more, very quietly. He kissed her then carefully with his hand still at her jaw and the fire snapping in the grate and the Wyoming winter pressing at the windows, and it was not dramatic in any outward sense, but inside it was everything, a contained universe of complete rightness, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a very long time. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for a moment. He kept his hand at her face. "Spring," he said. "Spring," she agreed. February gave way to March and March to April, and the Laramie Valley shifted under its seasonal turning. The snow retreated upslope to the mountains, and the first tentative green came up in the meadows, and Adelaide watched it from her kitchen window and felt the world coming back to itself, or maybe herself coming back to herself in it. The wedding was planned for the second Saturday of May, and it was not a large affair because neither of them was the kind of person who wanted a large affair, but Mrs. Hartwell insisted on making the dress Adelaide had not asked, but also had not argued, and Patterson at the general store quietly set aside a bottle of good bourbon for the occasion, and Sheriff Calloway, who doubled as a justice of the peace in the practical way of Wyoming territory, offered his services. But before May, there was the matter of the house. Adelaide sat Harvey down one Tuesday afternoon in April and put the question to him directly. What were they doing with two properties? "I have been thinking about that," Harvey said. "So have I," she said. They looked at each other. "My house is larger," he said, "but your house was your father's. Your house is closer to the eastern pasture, which makes more practical sense for the ranch operation," she said. "Your house is closer to town, which makes more practical sense for your work. I am planning to leave the dressmakers," she said. "By summer, I think. I want to help with the ranch." He looked at her with something that was not surprise but was certainly attention. "You want to work the ranch?" "I grew up on a ranch," she said. "I know cattle, I know horses. I know the land here better than you do, if we are honest about it, which I generally prefer to be. You are right on all counts, he said. I have been managing on my own and it has been manageable. But manageable is not the same as good. No, she said, it is not. My house then, he said, but we will keep your father's house. Let it or keep it for family, whatever seems right. She felt a warmth move through her at that, whatever seems right. He said it like the future was something they were building together with equal hands, which was exactly what she had never had and precisely what she wanted. There is one other thing, she said. He waited. My boots, she said. I need you to understand about the boots. He was quiet, but his attention sharpened. She told him then the full story of what her father had done, the night she came back. The instruction to leave her boots by the door, what it had meant to her through 3 years of reclaiming herself from the damage Thomas Greer had done, through the loneliness and the shame and the long process of learning to trust her own judgment again, what it still meant to her. Harvey listened to all of it without moving. When I saw them on the morning you came to tell me about my father, she said, the first thing I felt was panic, like the anchor had been cut. I know, he said. That is why I put them by the kitchen door. I know you did, she said, and I need you to know what that meant to me. She met his eyes. I need to keep doing it, in whatever house we live in. I need to leave my boots by the door. He held her gaze. Of course, he said, you understand why. You need to know you are welcome, he said simply. You need to see it every morning before you go anywhere. The boots are proof that you went to bed in a place that wants you there and that nothing changed in the night. She stared at him. Yes, she said softly, that is exactly it. Then we will have a place by the door, he said, and that place will be yours, and your boots will be in it every night, and anyone who has a problem with that will have a problem with me. She crossed the kitchen and sat down next to him instead of across from him, which was a new thing, and he turned slightly to accommodate her and did not make a point of it, just shifted to make her part of the configuration without requiring her to ask. Harvey, she said. Adelaide, he said. I am very glad my father liked you, she said. He put his arm around her. The first time he had done that, just laid it around her shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she settled into the warm, solid fact of him. And outside the April light was gold and green, and the cottonwoods were just leafing out and Laramie was waking up from its winter. The wedding was everything it was supposed to be and not one thing more. Sheriff Calloway performed the ceremony in the yard of Harvey's house, which was now their house, on a Saturday of fine warm weather. The apple tree Harvey had inexplicably planted in the yard 2 years ago was in its first real bloom, a cloud of white and pink that neither of them had engineered, but both accepted as a gift. Mrs. Hartwell had made Adelaide a dress of pale blue walnut white, which Mrs. Hartwell had called impractical for Wyoming, with covered buttons and a high collar, and a fit that made Adelaide feel elegant without making her feel unlike herself, which she considered a considerable accomplishment. Harvey wore his good dark suit and had gotten his hair cut that morning in what she suspected had been a matter of some deliberation. And when she came around the side of the house on the arm of old Patterson, who had offered to stand in for her father, and she saw Harvey there under the apple tree looking at her, the expression on his face made everything still for a moment. The way the world goes quiet sometimes in moments of absolute rightness. He looked at her like she was the fixed point that everything else in his life had been trying to orient toward. She walked to him, and Calloway read the words and they spoke theirs, and Harvey's voice when he said his vows was steady and quiet, and she heard every word. And then they were married in the second week of May 1883 in the yard of a house that was now theirs, under an apple tree in first bloom. Mrs. Hartwell cried. Patterson drank his good bourbon and made a toast that went on longer than strictly necessary but was genuinely felt. Harvey's brother Henry had not been able to come from Kansas City, but had sent a letter that Harvey read to Adelaide privately, which had made him go very quiet and her reach for his hand. That night, their first night, Adelaide went to the front door before she came to bed, and she set her boots down in the space beside it. Harvey watched her from the doorway of the bedroom, his shoulder against the frame, and said nothing. She looked at her boots. She looked up at him. He had built a small shelf there, she noticed. Just a low, plain shelf set into the wall beside the door, exactly the right height and width for a pair of women's boots. He must have done it sometime in the week before the wedding, quietly, without announcement. She put her boots on the shelf. She looked at him. "Welcome home," he said. She went to him, and the night took them, and it was their home, fully and completely and in every sense that mattered. The summer of 1883 was the best of Adelaide's life. That was not a complicated assessment. She was simply certain of it. The ranch work suited her, had always suited her, and working it with Harvey was a different thing entirely from the lone management he had been doing before. They were good together in the practical sense, which she had suspected, but they were also good together in the way of people who genuinely enjoy each other's company through the full day and the full evening and the full night, which she had hoped for but had not quite let herself be certain of. Harvey was a different man in the ease of a settled life. The watchfulness softened, not disappeared because it was part of him, but it became a quieter thing, more curiosity than vigilance. He laughed more than she had expected. He had a dry, precise humor that came out most fully when he was comfortable, and she found herself arranging his comfort with more care than she had ever applied to anything because the reward of his laughter, that open, genuine thing she had first seen when she agreed to marry him, was worth considerable effort. She learned the rhythms of his silences, which were many and various. The silence of concentration, the silence of contentment, the silence of something troubling him that he was working out. She learned to read them quickly and accurately, which she thought he noticed because he stopped bracing for her questions when he was quiet and simply let himself be quiet, trusting her to know the difference. They disagreed, occasionally, the way people do when both are strong-willed and direct. The first serious disagreement was about the eastern pasture. Adelaide thought they should expand their cattle numbers, and he thought they should wait another season and build up the feed reserves first. And it was instructive, the disagreement, because neither of them became something else in it. Harvey was firm but not immovable. Adelaide argued hard but not beyond the evidence. They sat at the kitchen table with the land records between them and worked it out, and what they arrived at was better than either of their starting positions, which seemed to Adelaide to be the exact shape a good disagreement should have. They compromised. They bought fewer cattle than Adelaide had proposed and more feed than Harvey had planned. The following spring told them they had been right to do both. In the fall of 1883, Adelaide realized she was expecting a child. She told Harvey on a Tuesday morning, which was not a day he came to her any more because they lived together, but it was still a Tuesday, which struck her as fitting. He was at the kitchen table with the cattle records and a cup of coffee, and she sat down across from him and said, without preamble, "I believe we are going to have a child." Harvey set down his coffee cup. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before and immediately recognized as joy in its purest form, the kind that is too full to be expressed as simple happiness and instead comes out as something like reverence. "Are you certain?" he said. "Fairly certain," she said. "Certain enough to tell you." He stood up. He came around the table and he took her face in both his hands, those careful, calloused hands, and he kissed her forehead and then her cheek and then her mouth, and she felt him exhale against her, a long and released breath. "Are you well?" he said. "I am very well," she said. "Are you?" He pulled back to look at her. "Are you happy about it?" "Harvey," she said, and took hold of his wrists where his hands framed her face. "I am the happiest I have been in my entire life." He closed his eyes briefly. "Good," he said very quietly. "That is exactly the right answer." She laughed. He laughed. It was Tuesday in Wyoming in October 1883, and everything was right. The winter of 1883 to 1884 was a hard one of the hardest in recent memory, and there were ranchers in the territory who would lose stock to it. Harvey and Adelaide had prepared well the extra feed, the reinforced barn, the careful management of the herd, and they came through it better than many, though it was not easy and there were nights when the cold was so fierce it seemed to come through the walls themselves. And Adelaide, heavy with the child by January, found herself confined more to the house than she liked. Harvey did not treat her like an invalid, for which she was profoundly grateful. He gave her work to do that could be done from the warmth accounts, correspondence, the sorting and planning that any operation of their size required, and he came in regularly through the day, not to check on her but because he wanted to see her, which was an entirely different thing, and she knew the difference. In late December, a blizzard kept them both housebound for 4 days, which would have been trying under other circumstances, but was, in fact, one of the most beautiful stretches of time Adelaide could recall. They had food and firewood and books and each other, and the isolation of the blizzard felt not like a trap but like a gift, a parenthesis in the ordinary demands of the world where they had nothing to do but be together. Harvey read to her when her eyes grew tired. She taught him to play cribbage, which he took to with an unsurprising precision and beat her within the week, after which she accused him of having secretly known how to play all along, and he denied it with a completely unconvincing straightness of face. In February 1884, in the front bedroom of their house on a night when the temperature had finally lifted enough to feel almost gentle, their son was born. Harvey was there. She had not asked him to stay and he had not asked permission. He had simply not left, and the midwife, Mrs. Connors from town, had given him a brief assessing look and apparently found him satisfactory, because she put him to work holding Adelaide's hand, and he held it with a steadiness that she gripped hard enough to hurt, and he never so much as winced. The baby came into the world with a considerable announcement of his presence, and Mrs. Connors put him in Adelaide's arms, and Adelaide looked at her son, this new person who had arrived in the bedroom of the house she and Harvey had built their life in, and felt the world expand around her in a way she had not known was still possible. Harvey leaned over her shoulder and looked at the baby. The baby looked at everything with the unfocused, determined intensity of the newly arrived. "He looks like he has opinions," Harvey said. Adelaide laughed even through her exhaustion. "He does," she said. "I respect that. What shall we call him?" They had discussed names. She had offered several and he had offered several and they had a short list. But looking at the baby now, she found she wanted something specific. "Raymond," she said. "Raymond Harvey Atkins." She felt Harvey go still beside her, the particular stillness of something striking very deep. "Are you sure?" he said very quietly. "My father would have liked you," she said. "You would have liked him, Raymond Harvey Atkins." She looked up at Harvey. "And when he is older we can tell him who he is named for and why. Both of them." Harvey pressed his lips against her temple, which was as close to undone as she had ever seen him, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Raymond Harvey Atkins was a healthy and energetic child, who demonstrated an early tendency toward climbing things that were not designed for climbing and a disarming smile that, Adelaide told Harvey, he had clearly inherited from the Atkins side, because it was exactly Harvey's full smile, unguarded and transformative. Harvey disputed this claim on the grounds that the baby's eyes were the same gray-green as Adelaide's, and his stubbornness was clearly her inheritance. Adelaide found this argument largely correct, but chose not to concede the point for reasons of personal satisfaction. By the time Raymond was learning to walk, in the early spring of 1885, the Atkins ranch was doing well enough that Harvey was able to hire a hand, a young man of 21 from Nebraska named Will Soper, who was hardworking and good with horses, and kind enough with little Raymond that Adelaide approved of him from the first week. With Will's help, Harvey could do more in a day, and what changed was not the amount of work but the quality of his evenings. He came in at a reasonable hour. He sat with Adelaide and Raymond. He read. He was present in a way that the pure physical demand of running a ranch alone had not allowed. Adelaide watched this transition and felt something settle further into rightness in her chest, which she had not known could go further right than it already was. But it kept doing that, kept deepening the satisfaction of their life together. It did not stay static and comfortable. It grew, the way a good thing grows when it is well tended. She had always thought in the years of her most uncertain self that contentment must be a flat thing, a plateau, that once you arrived you simply stayed neither higher nor lower. She understood now that she had been wrong. Contentment, real contentment, was not a plateau but a direction. It went somewhere. It built. Their second child arrived in the summer of 1886, a girl they called Clara, named for Harvey's mother who had died in Missouri when he was 15, and whom he had loved fiercely and mourned quietly ever since. Clara had her father's dark hair and her mother's gray-green eyes, and a temperament of formidable placidity that contrasted sharply with Raymond's perpetual velocity. Adelaide loved them both with the full force of everything she had, which was considerable, and Harvey was the kind of father she had hoped he would be, which is to say the kind of father who got down on the floor with small children and answered their questions seriously and showed them how to do things with patient hands. She watched him one afternoon in the fall of 1886, sitting on the porch steps with Raymond, who was 2.5, showing him something in his hands. She came to the door and saw it was a small piece of carved wood, a horse, rough but recognizable, that Harvey had clearly been working on for some time. Raymond received it with the solemnity of the very young being given something precious. He turned it in his small hands and looked at his father and said something Adelaide could not hear, and Harvey's answer made Raymond's face light up completely. Adelaide stood in the doorway and felt, with a clarity that was almost unbearable in its sweetness, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She went back to the kitchen and made supper, and the sounds of the ranch in the late afternoon, the cattle and the horses and Raymond's periodic commentary on the porch, filled the house around her, and she was completely, uncomplicatedly happy. The boots were by the front door where she put them every night. They were there every morning when she came down. They had never not been there. Once, early in 1885, she had woken in the night and come down for water and passed the door in the dark, and Harvey had been sitting in the chair by the window, which was where he sat when he could not sleep, with a book open and a low lamp burning. She had looked at the boots, sitting in their shelf by the door in the lamplight. "You know," she said quietly, "I do not always think about why I put them there anymore. It is just what I do." Harvey looked up from his book. "Do you want to stop?" he said. "No," she said immediately. "Then it does not matter whether you think about why," he said. "The feeling is still doing its work." She got her water and went back to bed, and lay there in the warm dark thinking about that, about how habits of safety become so embedded that they no longer feel like safety measures. They just feel like living, until you take them away and suddenly remember why they were there. She never wanted to take them away. In 1887, when Raymond was 3 and Clara not quite 1, Harvey's brother Henry came out from Kansas City. Henry Atkins was 28 years old, shorter than his brother and more immediately sociable, with the quick laugh of a man who has worked in foundries and learned that human warmth is the main comfort available in hard circumstances. He came intending to stay 2 weeks and ended up staying 2 months, helping with the fall work and spending evenings at their kitchen table with remarkable gratitude for the home-cooked meals and the company of children who did not know him, and immediately decided he was enormously interesting. Adelaide liked Henry. He was uncomplicated in a way that complemented rather than clashed with Harvey's depth, and watching the two brothers together told her things about Harvey that she had not known, small stories of their boyhood in Missouri that made the man at her table more fully dimensional. Henry was also, she noticed, increasingly attentive to the postmaster's daughter, a young woman of 20 named Frances Albright, whom Henry encountered first at the general store, and subsequently at every social occasion Henry could manufacture an excuse to attend during his extended stay. Adelaide said nothing about this to Henry, but said a great deal about it to Harvey in the privacy of their bedroom, where they had a long-running conversation about the Atkins brothers' shared tendency toward extreme deliberateness in romantic matters. "Francis is clearly interested," Adelaide said. "Henry is working up to it," Harvey said. "He has been working up to it for 6 weeks." "The Atkins men are methodical," Harvey said, from the dark of his side of the bed. "You proposed to me in February," Adelaide said. "I would not call that methodical." "I had been working up to it since October," he said. She turned toward him in the dark. "The Atkins men are very slow." She could hear the smile in his voice. "We get there." Henry Atkins finally asked Francis Albright to walk with him on the Sunday before he was supposed to leave for Kansas City. Adelaide heard about it from Francis herself, who came into the dressmaker's the following Tuesday transformed in the particular way of young women who have had an important conversation and are still glowing with it. He had asked Francis to write to him, Henry had, and she had said yes. And there was in this correspondence an understood intention that both Mrs. Hartwell and Adelaide could see plainly, and which Henry and Francis were, in the Atkins manner, working toward with all appropriate deliberateness. Henry went back to Kansas City with the address of the Laramie post office written on a piece of paper that Adelaide suspected he had memorized but would keep anyway. "Your brother is going to marry that girl," Adelaide told Harvey that evening. Harvey nodded. "Probably," he said, "if he is not too slow about it." "Perhaps you could advise him," she said. "On what grounds? It took me 18 months from the first time I saw you to declare myself." She stared at him. 18 months. "I first saw you in April 1881, he said, "at the general store. You were buying fabric and you were wearing a blue dress and you were arguing with Patterson about the price of calico with a composure that I found striking. April 1881. 18 months before Raymond Boone died, 14 months before Harvey began leasing the eastern pasture, 17 months before he ever spoke to her." "You never told me that," she said. "I have not told you everything," he said pleasantly. "I am a methodical man." She threw a pillow at him. He caught it, still smiling. "Harvey Atkins," she said, "you are full of surprises." "1 or 2, he agreed. She crossed the distance between them, and his arms came around her, and she pressed her face into his shoulder and felt his heartbeat, steady and reliable as everything else about him, and thought about a man standing in the general store in April 1880, watching a woman argue about calico, and carrying that watching quietly inside him for a year and a half before the terrible circumstances of a father's death created the opening he finally stepped through. "I am glad you were there," she said. "That morning when I came downstairs and he was gone, I am glad it was you." His arms tightened around her. "So am I," he said. "So am I, Adelaide." She had not gone by Adelaide Boone for 4 years now, but she was still Adelaide, and the name in his mouth was still the most particular sound she knew, and she thought she would never stop hearing it that way. The years moved with the productive steadiness of a well-run ranch and a well-tended life. The children grew. Raymond at 4 was opinionated and energetic, and could already identify every cattle brand in the territory by sight, which Harvey encouraged with a gravity that Adelaide found both practical and charming. Clara at 2 was a person of quiet determination who had recently decided that the barn cat was her specific responsibility, and the cat, to everyone's surprise, had accepted this designation. Will Soper, their hired hand, had found himself a girl in town and was talking about land of his own, and Harvey was helping him think through the practicalities with the same patient directness he brought to everything, because that was the kind of man he was. Henry Atkins wrote regularly from Kansas City, and his letters to Harvey arrived simultaneously with the delivery of letters to Francis Albright at the post office, a coincidence that no one in Laramie found coincidental at all. By the spring of 1888, Henry had come back to Wyoming twice, and on his second visit he and Francis had a conversation that resulted in Francis appearing at Adelaide's door on a wet April morning with shining eyes. And Adelaide put the kettle on and opened a tin of biscuits, and they sat at the kitchen table together, while Frances explained that Henry had asked her to marry him and she had said yes, and they were going to settle in Laramie because Frances did not want to leave Wyoming, and Henry, it turned out, had been thinking for some time about making the move west. "He is coming here," Adelaide said. "He is going to try to find land," Frances said. "He says Harvey might know of something." Harvey did know of something, as it happened. There was a parcel of land 2 miles to the north that had come available when its owner decided to move his family to Oregon, and it was a good piece of land with solid water access. And within a month of Henry and Frances Albright's wedding, a somewhat larger affair than Harvey and Adelaide's own, Frances, being a more sociable creature with a larger family, Harvey Atkins, was the owner of it, and the work of building a life on it was underway. Having Henry close changed things in ways Adelaide had not entirely anticipated. Harvey was different with his brother near, not better or worse, but more complete, the way a person is when a piece of their history is present rather than carried internally. The two men worked alongside each other on the big seasonal tasks, the roundups and the fence mending and the harvest of the kitchen garden that Adelaide and Frances ran together with a competitive cooperation that both of them pretended was purely practical. The women's friendship was its own thing, distinct from the men's. Adelaide was older by 8 years and had considerably more experience of the world's harder possibilities, and she did not push that experience on Frances, but she made herself available. And Frances, who was intelligent and direct, took what was useful and left what was not. They talked about their husbands with the frankness of women who know that talking about their husbands does not diminish their love of their husbands, but instead makes it more knowable. Adelaide told Frances about the goldenrod tied with red ribbon, which Frances found perfectly characteristic of the Atkins men. Frances told Adelaide about a night Henry had spent in the barn trying to save a difficult calving, because he had promised the heifer's previous owner he would do right by his animals, emerging at dawn muddy and exhausted with the calf alive and a grin like a boy on a Christmas morning, and Adelaide found that perfectly characteristic too. Raymond Boone, her father, gone these 6 years, had once said to her in the early weeks of her return that the quality of a life was measured not in its large events but in the texture of its ordinary days. She had not understood it fully then. She understood it now. The ordinary days were extraordinary. That was the whole discovery. In the fall of 1888, Adelaide found herself expecting again, and she told Harvey on a morning when he was drinking coffee at the kitchen table and Raymond, now 4, was attempting to convince Clara, now 2, to participate in some scheme involving the barn cat and a length of rope, a project that was generating mixed reviews from Clara. Harvey set down his coffee and looked at her with that same reverence he had shown the first time, unchanged in its quality by familiarity. "Are you happy?" he said. "I have been happy since May 1883, she said. "I expect I will remain so." He stood and took her hands in his. "Another one," he said, with something that was not quite words and not quite not words. "Another one," she agreed. Raymond from the other room had a loud and specific opinion about the rope and the barn cat. Clara's response was calm and final in the manner that was entirely Clara's. Harvey kissed Adelaide's forehead. "Your family is expanding, Adelaide Atkins," he said. "Our family," she said. "Our family," he agreed. Their third child, a boy they named William Will, after their hand, who had by this time found his own land and a wife, and was making his own good start, arrived in the spring of 1889, in the same front bedroom where Raymond and Clara had arrived before him, with Mrs. Connors presiding and Harvey present, and the apple tree in the yard in its 6th bloom. Young William was a cheerful and round-cheeked infant of no particular resemblance to anyone in the family, which Harvey said was a mark of independence, and Adelaide said was a mark of his own unique self, and both of them were right. By 1889, Wyoming territory was on the edge of statehood, a subject of considerable discussion in every establishment in Laramie. The question of women's suffrage was part of that discussion, Wyoming having granted women the vote in 1869, a fact that Adelaide Atkins was not shy about bringing up in any conversation that suggested the arrangement was unusual or temporary. Harvey agreed with her without reservation and did not require any persuasion, which she had appreciated from the moment she understood it to be the case. "Henry says some of the men in Kansas City think it is a mistake," Harvey said one evening. "Some of the men in Laramie think so too," Adelaide said. "They are wrong." "Yes," Harvey said simply. She had never once had to argue with him about her personhood, her capability, her right to an opinion or a decision. She was aware that this was not universal among women of her time and place, aware of it not abstractly but concretely, from the women she knew who did not have what she had, and she did not take it for granted for a single day. The boots were still by the door. They had accumulated company over the years. Raymond's small boots appeared there by the time he was old enough to go out and come back in, and Clara's beside them, and eventually little William's. Harvey's work boots had their own hook by the door, which he had built to keep them separate from the family row, but they were adjacent, and the whole small arrangement by the front door of the house was one of Adelaide's favorite sights in the world. Every morning she came down and saw it, and the feeling was the same as it had ever been. She was here, she was wanted, she was home. On a morning in July 1890, a year after Wyoming became the 44th state of the United States of America, Adelaide came downstairs before anyone else was awake and stood in the hallway in the early light, looking at the boots. Her father's voice came to her clearly and without pain, which had not always been the case. "Leave them by the door, so you know when you wake up and see them that you are exactly where you are supposed to be." She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had been a girl who ran away from herself and came back broken and been put back together by a man who understood, without needing it explained, that belonging is not a given, that it needs to be made visible, that some people need to see the proof of it every day, and there is no shame in that need, only wisdom in meeting it. And then she had been a woman who had lost that man and stood in the empty house with his absence pressing in from every direction, and another man had walked in and moved her boots carefully to where she could still find them. That was the beginning of everything, that small, careful act. She heard Harvey's step on the stair behind her, the particular weight of him that she could identify in complete dark, and she did not turn around. He came to stand behind her. She felt the warmth of him at her back. He looked at what she was looking at. "The row is getting long," he said. It was. 3 children's boots plus hers, plus Harvey's adjacent on his hook, a whole accumulating life visible in miniature by the front door. "Good," she said. He put his arms around her from behind, her back against his chest, and they stood there in the morning quiet while the sun came up over the Laramie hills and sent its first gold through the eastern window. "Are you happy?" he asked. He still asked her this regularly, not out of insecurity, but because he believed in checking rather than assuming, and she had come to love the question for exactly that reason. "Harvey," she said, leaning into him, "I am so happy it is practically an embarrassment." His laugh was low and warm and entirely real. "Good," he said. "That is exactly the right answer." The children began to stir upstairs. William, 14 months old, made his morning announcement with a cheerful lack of subtlety. Clara's small feet padded toward the stairs. Raymond's voice could be heard explaining something with great authority to no one visible. The ranch was waking up outside, the horses in the pasture, the cattle in the far field. The apple tree in its 7th year, fruiting heavily now, dropping its first of the season into the long grass. Harvey kissed the top of her head. "Breakfast," he said. "Breakfast," she agreed. She turned from the boots, from the door, from the morning light making its promise on the floor, and she went with him into the kitchen, into the warm and ordinary and extraordinary life they had built from grief and care and stubbornness and goldenrod tied with red ribbon, and a book carried from Cheyenne, and a man who moved her boots carefully to a place where she could still find them. She put on the coffee. He fed the stove. Clara appeared in the doorway in her nightgown with her hair in a spectacular state of independence, and Harvey scooped her up, and she complained about it while clearly finding it entirely satisfactory. Raymond came in behind his sister and went directly to the window to check the state of the morning, which was his daily assessment. William's voice from upstairs was increasing in urgency, and Adelaide went up for him, climbing the stairs of the house that was hers as fully as any house had ever been anyone's, and she collected her youngest son from his crib, and he regarded her with the comprehensive contentment of a baby who has never in his short life had reason to doubt that the world is a place designed for his specific welcome. "Good morning," she told him. He expressed a full and detailed opinion in return. She carried him down to the kitchen, to Harvey and Clara and Raymond and the coffee and the morning and the boots by the door and the life they had made. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything, accumulated daily, ordinary and extraordinary and complete. Raymond Boone had put his daughter's boots by the door so she would not leave without knowing she was welcome. She had stayed. And in the staying, she had found Harvey Atkins, who had understood the boots without explanation, who had moved them carefully to where she could find them on the worst morning of her life, who had built her a shelf for them in their shared home, who had asked her every day since in one way or another whether she was happy, not because he needed the reassurance, but because he believed she deserved to be asked. She had found a life that was her own, fully and without compromise. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, and she would know it every morning when she came downstairs and saw her boots waiting for her by the door.